Hola, I'm Claudia Romo Edelman.
And I'm Cynthia Kleinbaum Milner.
And this is a podcast, A La Latina.
The playbook to succeed being your authentic self.
Today, Teresa Lopez, General Manager, Pureology, Mizani, and L'Oreal Technique. And here are the 3 key takeaways.
Number 1, she describes a sponsor as someone who will fight for you even when it gets hard for them. She gave an example of her first sponsor who literally prevented her from getting promoted because she wasn't ready, but then helped her get there.
Number 2, get to know your competitors even better than they do. Know themselves as a competitive advantage.
And number 3, she shared how she handles microaggressions at work, when to face them and when to let them go.
All of that and more here at A La Latina.
Stick around.
We've been discussing how important it is for Latinas to generate wealth, particularly because we understand that only 33% of Latinas have retirement income from savings or other assets. So how can your company help in this equation?
Well, we have several options for saving and investing accounts. The one for beginners, if you are a beginner, is our fully managed investing product. This is perfect for those who want to set it and forget it. You can select the risk level and even choose the type of companies you can invest in.
That's amazing. So what is the minimum needed to open an account?
$1. You just need $1. No excuses. The earlier you begin to invest, the sooner you will start seeing returns from your investment.
So how can people get started?
Simply download the Money Lion app and open a managed investment account. It's quick. It takes just a few minutes.
Perfect.
Let's do it.
Today, Teresa Lopez.
Teresa is a general manager for Pureology, Mizani, and L'Oreal Technique. She's also on the board of Beauty Changes Lives.
Welcome, Teresa. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And I'm so excited because you told us that you listen to this podcast. So you're the first listener who now gets to share your story. Thank you for being here. I studied your journey, and I would love for us to start when you were a little girl, because what I understand is that your parents exiled Cuba,
Yes.
moved to the US, and you grew up with parents that were immigrants that came through very difficult situations. So can you tell us about those early years growing up in a country where maybe you didn't have your family, your community? How was your upbringing like?
So interesting. Both my parents exiled Cuba in 1960. They didn't know each other, so they were very young. My mother came to New York by way of Spain. My father went directly to New York. They met, they were married, they had me. Boom. They created a home, of course, with family, with community. For me, when you crossed the threshold of our home, you were in Cuba. So it was a perfectly bilingual home, Spanish-led first. It was a house filled with much music. My mother was a professor. She studied to be a professor. It was not her first choice career.
Professor in what?
So she wanted to be a doctor originally when she was in Cuba. So with emigrating, she became a professor instead.
In medicine?
And no, not in medicine, actually. She made another choice. So it was in humanities and languages. So she specialized in something completely different as life took her and made different decisions. And our home, everyone was a student all the time. And it was all about the subtleties of culture and history. And it was our culture and history, the culture of our cohort, other cultures. It was always very present in our home, the things that unite us, the things that sometimes set us apart. It was a very rich upbringing. Yeah.
Here in New York City.
Here in New York City, and I was very fortunate.
Can I ask you about being Cuban exile and your connection to the idea of a country when you said Cuba was home? But my understanding is that when you exile Cuba, you don't want to do
Correct.
anything with Cuba, but nevertheless, you're Cuban in values, or what's the connection like? What's the relationship? Is it a love and hate? You take some parts and not others, or?
So it's all love, actually, because the realization in the home was our country no longer exists. So the country we left behind will always be. And it always is. But the country that exists now, I don't know, I don't recognize, I don't identify with. That's how it was presented. That's how it
like
was.
A loss.
Like a loss.
Death.
Like a death. Exactly right.
Wow.
Exactly right. And the majority of our family, extended family, left as well. So there was only one cousin who remained with his immediate family, but everyone else left. So I had my entire family around me between New York, Miami, LA, Spain. You know, we didn't have a sense of loss of family. We had a sense of loss of country.
And who was here in New York with your parents?
Almost everybody. Okay. Grandparents, cousins, uncles. My grandmother was one of 11 children. So 10 of the 11 children and their families were all here. My mother was one of 2. And my father, funny enough, was an only child. And I'm an only child.
And then what did your dad do professionally?
How he was an accountant.
Okay, so there was a lot of focus on education and like having...
Yes.
And
yes.
What did you decide to study? Why? Where did you go?
So interesting that my track was a dual major. So it was international relations and comparative literature, 2 very different tracks. And that's a bit of a theme in my education. Very balanced, and it was exactly what I needed it to be. I was getting right side, left side of the brain, if you will. And when I graduated, interestingly enough, you know, I was going to go to law school. That was my choice. That was my track. That's where I was going.
Yeah.
And the summer in between undergrad and going to law school, it was the month of July, I'll never forget. And I said, I'm not going.
Why?
It was a cathartic moment of, this is not my path. My father cried for days. My mother said, okay,
so now what?
I support you, but you have a month to get a job.
Wait, but like, how did you decide that it just felt, or like you talked to people?
No, I talked to no one. I just woke up one day and I imagined what my life was going to be for the next 3 years, and I had
2,000 hours.
I was coming off of 4 years.
A lawyer.
I was coming off of 4 years of study, and it just didn't feel right. And it was hard for me to follow such a big decision on feeling and not thought.
But why didn't you talk to people? Like, why? Who was your network, or did you have mentors or people that you could talk to about this decision?
So yes, certainly. I had, you know, a very supportive network of friends and family around me, and I could talk to my mother about anything, you know, and certainly regarding education. But she established in me a very strong sense of self. You know, and she wanted me to have a strong voice and to trust that voice. And sometimes it made mistakes, and it was okay to learn from them. And she was very supportive in my decision, but she just didn't want me to languish in that decision. And I had to find a different path.
And so, can you connect to any of your current superpowers to the values that you were installed by your family and community?
Yes, absolutely. One of my superpowers is connecting with people. So when I was even very young, it was instilled in me so early about connecting with the total individual. So not just what excites them, what motivates them, what their family is like, what their priorities are, maybe outside of work. And it allows for me as a leader now of teams to lead the individual, not lead the team, right? There's this, you know, push and pull, you know, of the accelerator and the gas, the brake and the accelerator that you take, where there are decisions you take on behalf of the collective, and there are decisions that you take on behalf of the person. And you have to meet the person where they are. And I truly believe that that is something that comes from your culture, from your sense of self, who you are, how you've been raised, that allows you to do that and to do it naturally and authentically in a way that connects with them.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I just read a book about military leadership and how it's exactly the opposite. You never think of the individual. You never meet people where they are. You think of the collective and you take decisions that are the bigger, like the best decisions for the group. So I guess that's why our leadership style is never going to be authoritarian.
Yeah. It's funny, when you said connecting with people is your superpower, Claudia and I looked at each other because we just interviewed a lawyer who said that that's her superpower. So I guess that's a very Latina superpower that you can use.
Maybe I could have been a lawyer.
Maybe. So you started basically your career in marketing in beauty.
Yes. Well, almost. My first job was in banking. Yeah, it was in finance because I was so scared not going straight to school. I needed a job that was going to pay me.
Yeah.
And okay, my father was the accountant and, I had a little bit of that in my background. And almost 4 years I worked for Merrill Lynch, emerging markets, trading and sales. Wow. I started on the trading side. I moved to the sales side.
That's not bad for a first job.
No, that's I mean,
it's like, okay.
I know I have a lot of friends that had like banking jobs before business school, and then in business school they did something else. So it is a good job after college.
Yeah, I mean, I started at the very bottom, and I had no idea what I was getting into, but it was an interesting product, and it was an interesting cultural team, and
a good first job.
A really good first job. I learned a lot. And out of that job, I decided to go to business school and get my MBA. And then during my MBA, I said, I need an internship and I'm going to see what there is. And there was this job posting for Maybelline at L'Oreal. And I said, okay, this sounds interesting. And I talked to my team at Merrill Lynch and I said, you know what? I think I really want to test this. So I went for my interview. I had no idea what I was getting into. By the time I got home on my then answering machine, I had the offer waiting for me to come back. Wow. I went to my family, my parents. I said,
those
oh my God,
good days of answering machines.
I mean, I just thought about when I got my internship call and the emotion, right?
So
like you
exciting.
feel like, I remember when I got my call from my internship during my MBA, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and come on, like cosmetics, it's fun.
Yeah.
Like, so I told my family, and they were like, "Oh, finally, this is perfect."
Yes.
And I said, "What do you mean? Like, why do you think it's so perfect? I've been doing okay, And they said, "No, this is perfect." And my mother quickly told me a story of when I was young. She said, "Oh my God, Teresa, you were obsessed with going to Paris. Obsessed as a child. Every time, and we traveled a lot. And for every trip, she said, oh, we're going." And I said, "To Paris." "No, not to Paris, To
the supermarket.
And it would be somewhere else. And I said, okay. And finally, when I was 10 years old, it was Paris. And it was the most magical thing ever. I still romanticize it in my mind. I have the passport from the metro still, And it was, in a way, predestined for me. I don't know. I think about it that way. And today, my younger son asks me, can we go to Paris?
I wonder whether we can have a segue and just like thinking you and I on, like the things that you start seeing in your children and how does that transform into later. We heard from someone that really like Ana Corrales, saying that you really start seeing what really you are and what the things you do really early on, the things that you're good at as a kid, the things that give you energy. My daughter, I remember when she was actually potty training, she would take the magazines and start kissing the advertisement of the diamonds, like, mwah, mwah. And so I wonder, what does it say about her?
Yes. Start saving money. Okay, so you joined Maybelline. After your MBA, you take the full-time job at Maybelline?
I do.
And then, what is it, 20, how many years ago?
24.
24 years of climbing the ladder, getting promoted. How did you do it? Because I'm sure a lot of people have spent 20 years at L'Oreal and are not at the position where you are. So what do you think was your framework or playbook?
Look, I would love to say that it's something magically unique. I don't think that it is. I think that I've always come to the table with a tremendous amount of curiosity about everything. It's always about the why. Why? Like a 5-year-old. Why? And it's about doing the work and not being afraid to do the work. And taking the time for what's really required. And going that extra mile. Of course, it's about building your network, finding your community within the company of, peers and team members and, bosses along the way. I've had a really fortunate experience in my 24 years of having been influenced, grown, nurtured by an incredible group of leaders that are so differentiated from each other, and they've each given me something unique that I've taken away from it. So the mentorship that comes with that, of course, is huge. But the truth is that the magic comes in the sponsorship. That is the part that you cannot plan for.
Well, but how did you?
That has to come. That has to come authentically. It has to come organically. You have to connect, with that person or those people along the way. They have to be the ones who see you and see your accomplishments, see the quality of your work, and who are willing to fight for you in the rooms that you're not in. And, that's hard because even the ones that are willing to fight for you, they have to fight for you when it gets hard for them. Like when it's easy, when it's straightforward, okay, there's lots of people that are willing to do that. But the ones that are willing to do that when it's not popular,
when it comes to their
struggle,
cost, to their own capital.
Exactly. And I know it because I've been a sponsor for people where I've taken the hit personally, but it's meant so much to me to give them voices in rooms that they're not in. And I've stuck to it, not for everybody, for the select few that I think are really worth it and that are really contributing at a different level, So that's really the crux of the magic, is finding who that person is that you connect with and that you believe sees you, those layers of you and your work.
Can we talk about one of them?
Sure.
Like how did the relationship evolve? What that person did for you?
So it's funny. I'll give you the example actually of my very first sponsor. Because I think that sometimes is your most impactful when you're seeing it happen and unfold for the very first time. She was an English woman who was in the U.S. on assignment. She was the general manager of Maybelline at the time, and I was being discussed in one of those rooms, for a potential promotion and a move to another part of the business. And she actually told them that I wasn't ready.
Your sponsor?
Yes. And she came
we don't
to
like her at this moment.
No,
I hope that there's a plot change, a twist.
We actually love her. We love her. So, we love her. And she came to my office directly after the meeting. And she was so transparent with me. And she said, Teresa, I want you to know what just happened. She told me about the meeting. She told me everything that was discussed. She told me exactly the exchange. She told me exactly the job that was being discussed. I had no idea about any of this, by the way. None of it, right? I couldn't even imagine that my name would be uttered in connection to this job. Right? And she said, but I told them that you weren't ready. And this is my firm belief, that you are doing so well that you are 9 to 12 months too early for this job. That if you go into this job now, knowing how you approach your work, this will burn you out and take you to a different place. And it was the hardest thing for me to do, to not fight for you in the positive. And I'm so glad I was in the room to discuss it, because if I hadn't, they would have given it to you. They would have, sent you on your way. And I really, truly don't believe it would have been the best thing for you.
At the moment, how did you feel? Sorry.
I actually felt okay, because I trusted her implicitly, and I appreciated the transparency so much. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't something that I was vying for or that I was hopeful or nothing, So it's not like she was shooting me down from an expectation. Mm-hmm. She was actually telling me, Teresa, your name is being discussed for things at this level. Like, that's the important takeaway here, that you're already in the room. Yeah. And for me, that was the most important message in that exchange. And it made me then sensitive going forward to the considerations regarding career progression.
I want to ask something, because we had people sitting right there, I think all of them, that have made it to the top, that had a sponsor that more or less did something like that. And our names are discussed in rooms, whether we know it or not, and most of the times without our control or without us being proactive. It is your luck if someone sponsors you. Is there any way to change it and to be proactive and to be in control so that you're a sponsor now? How could Latinas learn to call on sponsors, be good sponsorees, and make sure that we are more in control?
That's a tough question. Because I think that part of it is applying in a way for positions for consideration. And then there's the subtlety of being considered for positions that you're not necessarily applying for. Mm-hmm. Right? And they're not always one and the same, and they sometimes can happen concurrently.
Right.
So that's where it becomes difficult in that you have to trust in the sponsor or in the process.
But how do you get a sponsor to start with? Like, how do you not leave it to luck?
So I think there's the authentic and organic, and then there's the planning, right? So in the authentic and organic, it's, creating those network opportunities. It's seeing someone on a panel, loving what they're saying, planning for that coffee, making those moments that matter for yourself to find points of connection. Right? Showing what you've done, sending them an email, sending them a memo, showing them your past project, giving them exposure to your work when they normally wouldn't be necessarily. Maybe they're on another brand. Maybe, they're managing a different team. That's a way you can control your profile exposure. And then there's also, I worked with them in another brand. They're here now, and because I knew them before or worked near them before, now they're in a different capacity. They've been promoted, and I can make the connection in that way.
Maybe this is pushback. Maybe it's not. We'll see. But can you really get a sponsor without working with them? Like, because you said in the beginning, a sponsor, like for a sponsor to be really good for you, they have to be willing to defend you when things get hard.
Yes.
Can somebody really defend you if you have coffee and show them your work? Or it's like, it doesn't have to be your manager or your manager's manager. If you volunteer for work and get through work exposure to other teams, like I have found people that ask me to be their sponsor, and I'm like, maybe you're asking me to be your mentor, not your sponsor, because you can be great at having coffee and great at speaking for yourself, but am I going to put my name on the line for you? Only if I really know your work. So have you seen sponsorship happening more like, let's have coffee? Or should we tell our girls, go and work with people so more people see your work?
I think it's easier.
Yeah.
I think it's more straightforward. I think you don't have to work for the person to have them be your sponsor.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think you can work near them. They can be a peer. They can be in another
Yes.
function. They can have a different scope of responsibility. But if you're showing the work and setting up the coffee, and if they're hearing of you in another line, there's more work involved, but it can happen.
Okay, got it. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you is, every company, and you've worked with like many companies within your company, so maybe there's different styles or how decisions are made. I learned later in my career that it's important to know how promotions are discussed, who is in the room, what are the type of conversations that they have. How can somebody get an understanding of how, if you join a new company, or even if you're in a company, you're like, I want to get promoted, how can you understand what is the process in your organization?
Ask.
Ask your manager or HR.
Ask.
What are
ask.
simply, how do you
simply
promote here?
ask.
Yeah.
Simply
What are the promotions?
ask.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you're entering a company and you're new to a company, it should be one of your questions in an interview. You should know what career progression looks like in a company that you're considering to be a part of. You should know what's available to you in future. It doesn't have to be the mechanics, but you should know what the possibilities are.
I think it's super important. And the way I've had people asking it to me, it's two ways. One, which I think is a wrong way, and the other one, which is the right way. Some people ask you about a promotion almost like they just want to get promoted quickly. So they're like, okay, I'm going to take this job, but how do I get promoted to the next one? That is the wrong way to ask the question. The right way is, what does career progression look like? And I think it's good to know if your company has a perspective on how promotions happen, right? If it's not by chance, if it's things like you have to be operating at the new level for a year before you're considered to be, because people think the promotion happens and then you become that, I'm a manager. Once you make me a director, I'm going to be operating at a director level. And in my experience, it's the exact opposite. You operate at a director level, so when the conversation is happening and they're like, oh, we should promote Cynthia, the feedback from the room is,
she's director level.
Already a director?
Yeah.
Exactly. But
it's like age. You're 21, so you're suddenly adult.
Exactly. So
how did you get promoted so much? And how could Latinas use their Latinidad to get promoted, particularly in an industry like yours that is probably eager to attract Latinas as consumers? Therefore, being a Latina manager and director is a pro, because you're going to be able to understand the market and attract it.
Yeah. I mean, they have to do the work. It doesn't matter who you are. You have to do the work. You have to show the curiosity. You have to put in the time. You have to be prepared. You have to anticipate.
Yeah.
You have to anticipate what you don't know, right?
So read a lot, learn a lot, be that's being curious, right?
Yes, and when you're studying competitors, for instance, know more about the competitor than they know about themselves. That was a piece of advice that was given to me very, very early that I took to heart. And was said to me, like, Teresa, you know more about P&G than P&G knows about itself. Did you realize that? I can hands down tell you that that's a reality. And I didn't know that I was approaching it that way, but it was so meticulous in every little detail. It's something that has to be very present and deliberate in the approach. And now there's so many dynamic levels to it that it goes way beyond anything that I was doing at the same level. So there's an excitement to that. So of course, there's that drives results, clearly. Yeah. But there's also network, there's community that comes in peer
Yeah.
groups and teams and other teams that are near you, support teams, transversal teams, opportunities for leadership when you don't manage people. but you manage those around you that are subject matter experts that add to the work that you do. There's lots of ways to demonstrate influence.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity to stand out.
And the industry of beauty, it is increasingly driven by communities like ours, like Latinas.
Yes.
So how have you seen the change within your company towards more Latinidad, more understanding, more data, more like, again, and how do you describe what you're trying to do?
Oh, this is an amazing topic for me.
Okay.
Look at her eyes.
Bling, bling, bling.
So when I joined 24 years ago, every year or so they come with market research and they show, and it's the same thing. It's the Hispanic consumer as one cohort, one augment in the study, and I didn't know what that meant. And I would be sitting in rooms where we were discussed as a collective. I mean, look at the three of us. We couldn't be more different, right? So different hair types, different skin types. So how do you diagnose as someone creating beauty products what is right?
Yeah.
So it was maybe 3 years ago that I was exposed to a study that finally, for the first time, actually hit on that exact insight. Was, okay, but there's all of these layers.
Yeah.
And the same way you do sub-segmentation from every which way from Sunday for your regular consumer research, you have to do it for this cohort because otherwise you're not going to understand. You're not going to develop the right products with the right insights, with the right opportunities. And I celebrated because I finally had the thought that it was going to be something that was relevant, to not just to the company, of course, in the way forward, but that was going to give the brands within the umbrella of L'Oreal the chance to action it in the way that was right for them. Because that's the whole point of having a portfolio, is that so you can attract different consumers at different places for different reasons. Not everybody should be using the same strategy for the same group. And that's the way that we had been reading the data all this time. So I was so elated, when I saw that as this is the way we're marching forward. So I'm very proud of that.
And that's only 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Only 3 years ago.
Like we're celebrating, but nevertheless, there was a wake-up call that probably you put in there 10 years ago. So being Latina for you, did you have to ever dial down? Was it helpful in your career progression? What do you see as the industry changing and within your company? How is it for our community?
So thankfully, I'm blessed. I have never dialed down. Never once. And I believe that it goes back to how I was raised, always with a very strong sense of self, always with knowing exactly how much and what I contribute. I know that I was taught that I belong in every room that I'm in. It didn't matter if I was 5 years old and I was at a dinner table, in a restaurant. It didn't matter if I was in a boardroom. If I was in that room, I had a purpose.
So no imposter syndrome.
Absolutely not. Never.
We need to get your mom to be part of our foundation so that we can get everybody that we know to have a self-sense, understand what we bring to the table, and then know that you have a value.
She should write a book about parenting too.
I'm very fortunate about that. And sometimes I check myself because I'm like, really? Like, should you feel guilty? Should you feel the imposter syndrome? Like, are you too secure? But I don't, and I'm not.
Yeah.
It's just who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very clear about the things I do well. I'm very, very clear about the things I don't do well. And I'm equally confident about being clear about the things I don't do well.
Did you always feel that way?
Yes.
Yes.
Didn't
Because
matter.
she
Because
grew
of her
up
mom.
with that. So there's no
matter.
flipping the script for her. She
Yes.
was born with the right script.
The whole fake it till you make it thing, didn't exist for me.
And you've never encountered people that see you differently, that you have to be showing them that they're wrong.
It's very funny that you ask it that way, because for me, it's always been their shortcoming.
Yeah.
Right? So I have been in situations, certainly in my life, I've had microaggressions, and, people have said things that are not what I would like them to be. And I've been asked, hey, what was that like for you? And I said, it's just exhausting. Because they don't have the education of knowing exactly where I am and where I'm from. And, so it's their shortcoming, not mine.
But do you correct them? Do you just ignore them?
You know what? It depends on the situation. Sometimes it merits a correction because they're coming from a place of unknown ignorance and they would want to.
Yeah.
It's coming from a person who would want to be corrected, but sometimes not. And it's not worth it.
Yeah.
So, I'm not there to teach them.
Yeah.
They can learn somewhere else, but I'm not there to teach them.
Do you have any message for our young audiences or our Latina audiences about things that they should know about the beauty industry, about you, about your company?
I would say about my company, the reason I'm there 24 years and successfully there 24 years is that it is a place where it celebrates asking the why. It celebrates the individual. It encourages us to forge our own journey. We push back, and we've pushed back historically all this time about no job description because you make the job.
There's really no job description?
We're getting a little better about it, I guess, but
the trend is the opposite. The trend is not job description because jobs change so much that you hire people that are curious and hardworking and nimble.
So we were leading the trend.
Yes, exactly.
Like many
Take
things.
the credit, yes.
Like many things. But I love that. I love that I've been able to forge different paths and be given long leashes until, I fall down and okay, that didn't work, and I can fail and I can learn from that and I can, take risks and try again. And I love being in an environment that supports that, and lets me move forward.
So I do want to ask you, because you seem to be very in control. Everything has gone well. When it hasn't gone well, it still has gone well. So do you have any advice for your 30-year-old self?
Stay focused.
Okay.
Is what I would say to my younger self, because there's always bright, shiny pennies kind of in the periphery, but stay focused and it will serve you well.
So you were not always focused, you were trying to do too many things at once?
I think there's always the other possible lane here,
Yes.
the always possible lane there.
The greener pasture over there.
Yeah, there was law school and then there wasn't.
Yes.
So I think it's stay focused, but follow this.
Follow your heart.
Yeah,
But you did it.
I did it.
I think so.
I did it.
Okay, so you're when they ask you what's your biggest flaw in a job interview, and you say, I work too hard. What's your advice? Follow your heart.
Yeah, you follow your heart. But,
Yes.
In an interview, I would say, be authentic always. Don't be afraid to celebrate your accomplishments. And know that as you sit there, you are blessed. Because there are people that have come before you in your community that have been through a lot more.
Okay.
And the fact that you're sitting at that table being considered for a position is a wonderful place to be.
And I know there's a lot of Latinas in L'Oreal, but there's also Latinas that you probably know in your network. Who else should we bring to the podcast?
Emily Perez.
Emily Perez.
She is the founder and president of Latinas in Beauty.
Amazing.
I guess.
Amazing.
Okay, so
A very needed
Thank you.
and wonderful association.
We are so happy to have had you here today. It's amazing.
Great.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And with your wisdom and tips and tricks, we're going to be able to lead and succeed.
A la Latina!